The washing of his disciples' feet was a fitting symbol of Jesus' suffering and death. The foot washing wiped away from the feet of the disciples the dust and the dirt and the stink of their feet. And Jesus' death on the cross washed from us and cleansed us with regard to the filth of our sin. Particularly, the death of Jesus Christ cleansed us from the guilt of our sin, our exposure to the punishment of God under His wrath, because by our transgressions and by our corrupt nature we have violated His holy law. As we sing in Psalm 144, the death of Jesus Christ has cleansed us from our guilty stains. That cleansing gives to those for whom Christ died the right to have part in Him, to share in Him as members of His body, and to partake of the great salvation that is in Him. And when that death is applied to us through faith in Him, so that we have the forgiveness of our sins, we experience that we have a part in Jesus Christ. We are a member of His body. We are citizens of His kingdom. We share in and partake of His great salvation. We are assured by that faith in Him of our membership in Jesus Christ. And that connection, in connection with the reality of His death that was symbolized by the foot washing, Jesus Himself clearly and powerfully teaches in the passage that His death was not an ineffectual death on behalf of every human being without exception, but that death, symbolized now by the foot washing, was an effectual suffering, a suffering that actually cleansed from the guilt of sin everyone for whom Jesus died, for particular persons. Jesus Himself denies in the passage and in the context the false doctrine of universal atonement, a doctrine that, for all its noise about the blood and about the death, is a denial of the one sacrifice of Christ on the cross, as much as is the Roman Catholic doctrine of the Mass. For according to that doctrine, Jesus' death accomplished absolutely nothing. But the efficacy, the benefit of that death depends upon the choice, the will of the sinner. Jesus denies that doctrine. He denies that doctrine when He says in verse 10, the meaning of the foot washing is that you are entirely cleansed, and ye are clean. He assures the believing disciples, the 11 believing disciples who were sitting there, you are clean. By my death tomorrow, that is, but not all of you are clean. John explains in verse 11, for He knew who should betray Him. Therefore, said He, ye are not all clean. And then immediately after our text, in verse 18, but still referring to all of His instruction, In connection with the foot washing, his instruction about his suffering for the disciples and all his children, and his cleansing of all his people from their sins, Jesus added, I speak not of you all. What I am teaching, the gospel I am preaching, of cleansing by my death, does not apply to all of you 12 disciples. Then adds, I know whom I have chosen. His death did not cleanse all. And ultimately, the explanation why one is not cleansed is not his own unbelief, although such people are unbelievers. But the explanation is Christ's choice or election of those whom he would cleanse by his particular and efficacious death. He chose 11 of the 12, not the 12, but reprobated him. In the human race, there are many whom Christ has chosen. For them he died, effectually to cleanse them, and not for the others. Christ's foot washing symbolized his cleansing death on the cross. And that raises again the question, how can that suffering be an example for us? Christ's suffering was unique. He cleansed from sin by his death. No one but Christ is able to cleanse from sin. We're not able to cleanse anyone from his sin. Nevertheless, with reference to his suffering, Jesus said, I have given you an example that ye should do as I have done to you. In connection with the symbolical act, if I have washed your feet, ye also ought to wash each other's feet. The explanation, beloved, is this. Although the suffering of Jesus Christ was unique in that it was a cleansing from sin, Jesus' suffering was his service of us. His coming to our rescue when we were in deep need. His help of us with regard to a great need. His deed for our advantage and for our welfare. And it was his help of us at great cost to himself. Inasmuch as that suffering was his serving of us, that suffering can be and must be and is an example to us. The foot washing was a striking example in that regard. Striking example of service, real service. In those days and among those people when the roads were all dirt and the sun was hot, and the only footwear was open sandals, it was a deed almost of necessity on the part of a host when he welcomed guests into his home that he would see to the washing of their feet for their ease and comfort and well-being. And usually that was carried out by a slave of the master.